That spring, which was particularly bright in London, nothing occupied high society conversations more than the imminent wedding between Lady Isabella and the Duke of Ravenshire. By all visible standards, it was a perfect match. She was young, beautiful, and the heiress to a respectable fortune. He was an influential man, wealthy, irresistibly elegant, and dangerously reserved. But like every good story that unfolds beneath golden chandeliers and polished smiles, there was something that didn't shine in the light of day. In that season, secrets turned into letters and truths were revealed. There were only 10 days left until the wedding when Lady Isabella received the first letter, no signature, just her name, written in a firm hand. "If there's still time to save your heart, don't marry him, Lady Isabella." The paper trembled in her hand. Isabella was not a young woman prone to dramatics. She had been raised to keep her composure, to smile even in discomfort. Her fiancé, Duke Adriano of Heavenshire, was considered the most sought-after match of the season. Even the Queen herself had praised the union. She sensed a certain coldness from her fiancé, but chose to ignore it. Until the second letter arrived. The second envelope was delivered during a ball at the Montclair residence. The ball was lively, the orchestra played non-stop, couples twirled around, and Isabella danced a lot with her fiancé. When the dance ended, a servant discreetly approached and handed her the envelope. This time, the message was more direct. "Ask him about Eleanor Bennet." The name hit her mind like a crystal glass shattering on the floor. Eleanor Bennet was a young woman who had disappeared from society 2 years earlier. No one really knew what had happened. Isabella felt her stomach tighten. That same night, as the carriages were leaving, she asked, "Adriano, who was Eleanor Bennet?" For an almost imperceptible instant, the Duke lost his color, but he recovered quickly. "And she was my fiancée. But that happened a long time ago, and she passed away." Isabella was startled. "Bride? I didn't know you'd already had a fiancé, and even less so that she had passed away. Why didn't you ever tell me?" It's a sad story. She died young and suddenly. I don't even like to think about it. But who told you about her? Isabella felt her blood run cold. She almost stumbled over her words, but thought quickly and answered, "Yeah, I heard the name whispered tonight during the ball." The ladies love to revisit old tragedies when the champagne starts to go to their heads. Adriano watched her, suspicious. "Society is cruel to the dead," he said in a low voice. "And how did she die?" Isabella asked. "Fever," the Duke replied after a few seconds of silence. "A sudden fever. The doctors couldn't do anything." At that moment, he held her hand with a grip just a bit firmer than necessary and said, "But let's leave this subject alone, please, my dear." He kissed her hand and smiled. Isabella slowly acted as if she were satisfied, but something didn't add up. Why had he never mentioned that he had once had a fiancé, or how she had died? Fever? It seems strange. And worst of all, why was she receiving these letters talking about this woman? What did it matter on the eve of her wedding? There were so many unanswered questions. "I'm sorry I brought that up," she murmured, lowering her eyes with a practiced delicacy. "I didn't mean to reopen old wounds." Adriano relaxed slightly. "You're so kind, and I love that about you." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it. 2 days later, Isabella began to notice another unsettling detail. Gentlemen who always seemed to be present in the same places as she was. At the balls, on walks, at the opera. And that was especially strange because the young man was always staring at her. Not in a flirtatious way, but as if he wanted to tell her something. And that started to intrigue her because he never approached, he just watched her. Until finally, during a visit to the bookstore, he spoke to her. "Lady Isabella, if you'll pardon my boldness, do not trust the Duke of Heavenshire." His name was Thomas Bennet, Eleanor Bennet's brother, and he carried pain in his eyes. "Are you the one who's been sending me the letters? What valid reason would I have not to trust my fiancé? Who are you?" "Forgive me, Lady Isabella. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Thomas Bennett. I am Lady Eleanor Bennett's brother." Isabella said, "I know who Lady Eleanor Bennett is. My fiancé told me everything. I'm very sorry for your sister's death, and that it happened right when they were engaged. But I don't understand the relevance of that now to my engagement to the Duke." "Forgive me, Lady Isabella, but the Duke was not just engaged to my sister. They got married in secret, and soon after, my sister disappeared." Thomas looked around the bookstore before continuing. The tall shelves and the smell of old paper created a sense of safety, but even so, he still spoke in a low voice. "Lady Isabella, what I'm about to tell you, it may sound absurd, but I ask that you listen to me until the end." Isabella kept her chin up, even though her heart was racing. "Go on," she said. Thomas then took a deep breath. 2 years ago, my sister Eleanor was deeply in love with the Duke of Heavenshire. He courted her for months. He was charming, attentive, exactly the way he is with you now. Isabella then felt a chill run up her spine. But Thomas went on. They decided to get married in secret. They said they would make the official announcement shortly after. Only a few people knew, and I was one of them. They got married in a small chapel on the outskirts of London. The chaplain himself confirmed the union. But 3 days after the wedding, while they were still on their honeymoon, the Duke said she died of a fever. There was no funeral, no body. Just a letter sent to our family saying that Eleanor's had suddenly fallen ill during a trip to the countryside and had been buried there. He showed us the cemetery, the headstone, but we never got to see the coffin, let alone the body. My mother demanded an explanation, but the Duke refused to speak to us again. "And no one investigated?" Isabella asked. "We did investigate. I investigated." He then pulled a small, worn notebook from his coat pocket. "I went to the village where he said she died." Thomas opened the notebook and showed a page filled with notes. There was no burial at all during that time. Isabella felt her hands grow cold. "There was no death record," she then said. "So you believe that—" Thomas stared at her immediately. "Look, I believe my sister never died." The silence between them grew heavy, and then Isabella said, "But that's impossible?" He said she had died. "But there's one detail," Thomas continued. Isabella felt her stomach turn. He then slowly closed the notebook and said, 2 days later, she disappeared." Isabella stood frozen. "Do you have any proof of that?" Thomas looked at her sadly. "No, I don't have proof of that. Enough evidence to accuse a duke. His family is just too powerful. The only thing I have is Eleanor's letter telling me all of this. But without a document, anyone could say it was forged." Isabella felt the world tilt. "So you're saying that he—" "Look, what I'm saying is that my sister disappeared the same week she threatened the estate. Don't you think that's strange?" Isabella then took a deep breath, trying to process everything they just heard. A scandal would be devastating. But to accuse a duke without proof, it would destroy Isabella herself, too. "Everything you're telling me is really serious, sir. Thomas, and it's dangerous, too." "Lady Isabella, think carefully about what you're going to do. If something happened to my sister, what makes you think it won't happen to you? The Duke of Heavenshire only marries women who have something very valuable to offer." Isabella's heart started beating faster. She knew exactly what that meant. Coinhildiv. Then Thomas continued. "When I heard about your engagement, I realized history was repeating itself. That's why I sent the letters. Maybe there's still time for you to save yourself and help me save my sister. If she's not alive, at least her memory will be remembered." Back at home, Lady Isabella couldn't stop thinking about what Thomas had said. But there was one thing. Should she trust a man she didn't know, or her own fiancé. After all, Adriano had never been rough or rude with Isabella. He was attentive in his own way, protective and many times genuinely kind. Then, on a rainy afternoon, he found her alone in the garden. "You've been distant from me," he said. "Did something happen? You'd rather be out here in the rain than spend time with me in the living room?" He brushed his hand across her face. She had learned to like him, so for a moment she almost gave in. But she needed to know the truth. So she asked him again. "Adriano, why did you never tell me about Eleanor? Was she just your fiancé? Or did you two actually get married?" "Who's putting these ideas in your head, Isabella?" Adriano said. "Why are you asking these questions now, just days before a wedding?" "Just answer me, Adriano, please." "Isabella, don't worry about these things. Everything you need to know, I've already told you. I think this rain, my love, isn't doing you any good. The cold is messing with your head. Let's go inside." That night, Isabella stayed up all day. If Thomas was telling the truth, she was about to tie her life to a man capable of ruining anyone's life, all for money. But if Thomas was lying, she was risking everything because of a stranger. And still, there was something that wouldn't let her sleep. Her fiancé, Adriano, had never answered directly. He would just dodge the questions. The next morning, Isabella put on her calmest outfit, light blue, simple and discreet, and asked for her carriage to take her to her fiancé's residence. The imposing Ravenchari house stood like a guardian of secrets. "I came to surprise the Duke," she told the butler, smiling with a rehearsed sweetness. "I know he's out, but I thought I'd wait for him in the library." The servant hesitated for just a second, but she was practically already the Duchess. So she was led to the room and left alone. The library was spacious, masculine, filled with the scent of leather and dark wood. Isabella then closed the door. She started searching through the desk drawers. Contracts, receipts, property maps, but nothing incriminating. But there was one book that was different from the others. It looked like a wooden book, a strange one. When she pulled it out, she saw that, in fact, the book was a box. Inside were folded documents, tied with a black ribbon. Her hands were shaken as she untied the ribbon, and then she thought, a marriage contract. Signed, Adriana Ravenshire and Eleanor Bennet. 2 years ago. Attached to the contract, there was an additional clause. Transfer of Bennet property in the event of Eleanor Bennet's death. Isabella felt like she couldn't breathe. Could it be what she was thinking? Could it have been him who made Eleanor disappear? She kept going through the papers and found something even more frightening. A document for admission to a psychiatric hospital. But before she could read it, she heard the door open. It was Adriano. Isabella froze. She hadn't locked the door. But Adriano didn't seem surprised. "I figured it would come to this," he said, closing the door behind him. Isabella was holding the papers. "Where is Eleanor?" He slowly moved closer. "Isabella, you don't understand how this world works. Property doesn't stay in weak hands. Families ruin themselves over sentimentality. She trusted you." "She was unstable," Adriano shot back. He then stopped just a few steps away from her. "And you, Isabella, are 3 days away from becoming a duchess. Don't throw that away over nonsense." His gaze dropped to the documents in her hand and then rose back to her eyes. And he said, "Do you know what happens to women who spread accusations without formal proof?" The air grew heavy. There, for the first time, Isabella felt something she had never felt around him before. Fear. Fear of someone who could destroy her family socially with a single word. "Are you threatening me?" she whispered. He smiled, coldly. "I'm protecting our future, Isabella. Put the papers back where you found them, please, and go get some rest." You need to look beautiful and well-rested on our big day." Adriana's voice was gentle, almost affectionate. Isabella remained motionless for a second, which felt like an eternity. The crackling of the fireplace was the only sound in the library. He hadn't yelled, hadn't lunged, nor had he taken the documents by force, because he didn't need to. He believed she would obey him. And in that moment, she realized that confronting him wouldn't do any good. She needed to be clever, cunning, stealthy. She then forced a faint, almost trembling smile. "Of course, forgive me." Curiosity got the better of my good sense. Then she walked over to the bookshelf, opened the fake book, and as she carefully put the documents back in the box, she spoke to him. "In fact, darling, this is just nerves, pre-wedding jitters." Adriano looked into her eyes, gave a slight approving smile, and then nodded. "It's natural. Responsibility is scary." When she put the little box back in its place, he came closer and said, "Trust me to carry whatever is too heavy for you." Isabella smiled and said, "Of course, Arwen. Or better yet, of course, future husband." And then she kissed them. Adriana liked what he heard, but what he didn't notice was what had happened just moments before. While she was putting away the documents and talking to him, making him look into her eyes, her fingers, quick and discreet, slipped the thin document into the sleeve of her dress. And finally, the big wedding day arrived. It seemed like London had woken up just for that event. Carriages lined up in front of the grand cathedral. The gentlemen wore their finest tailcoats, and the ladies their best dresses. All the high society was in attendance. The union between Lady Isabella and Duke Adriano was the talk of the season. Inside the church, crystal chandeliers reflected the soft glow of candlelight. Arrangements of white and blue flowers adorned the central aisle. A string quartet played softly while the guests murmured among themselves. Adriano stood impeccable, positioned before the altar, elegant and confident, like a man who knew he was about to achieve exactly what he desired. And then the doors of the cathedral opened. Lady Isabella appeared, dressed in white silk with delicate embroidery that shimmered in the light. Her veil fell softly over her shoulders. The dress seemed light as mist. She walked with the perfect posture of a future duchess. But inside, her heart was pounding like a war drum because Isabella knew something that no one else there knew. The ceremony then began. The priest recited the traditional words. The guests watched in reverent silence. Adriano held her hand tightly until the moment arrived. "Lady Isabella, do you take Duke Adriano of Ravenshire as your lawful husband?" An absolute silence fell over the cathedral. Adriano gave a slight smile, and then she said, "No." A murmur swept through the church like a sudden wind. Adriano's eyes widened at her, surprised for the first time since he'd met her. "Isabella?" She then said, "Before I marry with the Duke of Heavenshire, I believe everyone here should know that he is already a married man." A collective shock swept through the guests. She then unfolded the paper. A marriage contract signed 2 years ago between Adriano of Heavenshire and Eleanor Bennet. People started whispering. Adriano laughed. A low, elegant laugh. "But that doesn't prove anything at all," he said, turning to the guests with aristocratic calm. "Is it a crime to marry in secret to someone you love?" Some people looked confused, others intrigued. He then looked at Isabella. "My dear, this only confirms what I've already told you. Eleanor was my wife, but she died." Before he could continue speaking, the doors swung open forcefully. Everyone turned around. A man staggered down the aisle. His face was bruised, his lips split, and one eye nearly swollen shut. It was Thomas Gennett. A murmur of shock rippled through the crowd. He stopped in the middle of the church, struggling to breathe. "The Duke?" "The Duke had me beaten this morning." The silence grew heavy. Adriano said nothing. Thomas then continued. Because he suspected I had told Lady Isabella the truth? The guests began to look at Adriano uneasily, but Isabella raised her hand. Mr. Bennet, there's no need for you to say anything more. Everyone turned to her again. He held up the document and said, because this document I have in my hands is not a marriage contract. This document is an admission form. Adriano frowned for the first time. She turned the paper toward the priest and the closest guests. Look here, Ashford Psychiatric Hospital, the neighboring town. A deadly silence fell over the church. Patient, Eleanor Bennet. Adriano stepped forward. Isabella? But she said, I'm not finished yet. Look what it says here. Admitted for 2 years. Exactly 3 days after the wedding. The whole church seemed to stop breathing. Then Isabella said calmly, This morning, I sent employees from my family, accompanied by the police, to this hospital. Her voice didn't tremble. And I did this to bring Eleanor Bennet here. At that moment, the church doors opened again and everyone turned around. A woman entered slowly, pale, fragile, her hair shorter, her eyes sunken, but unmistakable. It was her, Eleanor Bennet. Thomas brought his hand to his mouth, completely devastated. Eleanor, my sister, Eleanor, walked slowly down the aisle. With every step, the murmurs grew louder. When she finally stopped in front of the altar, she looked straight at Adriano and said, her voice honest but firm, I was never sick. The crowd began to murmur in shock. This man, he took me to that place. He told the doctors I was unstable, that I suffered from delusions and paid so I would never get out. Adriano then shouted, She's delirious. That's why she was committed, because she was a danger to herself. Thomas reacted immediately. You're a liar! Silence, Adriano, he interrupted authoritatively. He then discreetly pointed at Leonore. That's exactly why she needed to be committed. Paranoia attacks, uncontrolled imagination, fits of hysteria. Some of the guests started exchanging uncertain glances. Adriano then continued, now with a controlled voice. The doctors recommended the treatment. I just did what any responsible husband would do. He then turned to the priest. Imagine, Reverend, your wife in such a state remaining free in society? And then he looked at Isabella. And you, my dear, you were manipulated by people who want to destroy my name, destroy your name. You did this with your own hands. The police guards, who had been waiting outside, then moved down the hallway. The officer approached the altar and said, Adriano de Revenshire, you are under arrest for fraud, unlawful imprisonment, and attempted acquisition of property by illegal means. The whole church erupted in murmurs. The guards grabbed his arms. This is a mistake. This is a mistake. But no one seemed to believe him anymore. As they led him down the church aisle, the guests stepped aside, stunned by what they were witnessing. Eleanor collapsed into her brother's arms. Thomas hugged her tightly, as if he was afraid she might disappear again. Isabella remained standing at the altar. For a moment, Eleanor and Isabella exchanged a glance. There were no words, just a silent understanding between two women who had been deceived by the same man. Isabella then took a deep breath. Her wedding dress was still flawless, and for the first time since this whole story began, she felt relieved. Because on that particularly bright spring afternoon in London, Isabella didn't just call off a wedding. She stood up to a powerful man, exposed a cruel lie, and gave back freedom to a woman who had almost been forgotten by the world. And that's how the most anticipated wedding of the season became the scandal that no one would ever forget.